I never used the word career. It never even passed my mind that it would be a career. It was just, I thought art was life, and I had extraordinary teachers, and I had some really great thinkers as well. I took art history and philosophy, and York was also very involved in politics and social science. And so there were some very interesting critics there as well. Those were the days of abstract expressionism, and if you painted trees, you were just too square for words. So I painted stained canvases, and a little while after that, when I moved into a large warehouse, I was able to paint really big stained canvases. I was crazy about Morris Lewis. And it took me many, many years to give myself permission to change from abstract art to painting more about almost a storytelling quality about my life. I've been told I'm overeducated, so part of my problem was that I had been very influenced by what I felt was really important in modern art. But I gradually just found my own voice in my own story. And so, yeah, I was always interested in nature. And when I was a child, we always went camping and canoeing, and I kayak now out on the river. Well, I worked in Curry's art store, for one thing. I did a lot of little art gigs, and I had an office job that was part-time so that I could paint. So I was really sort of cobbling together a life, but I wasn't ever thinking. You used the word career. So that was, in those days, jobs were really easy to find, and people didn't think in terms of careers. Not very many people, not the people I knew. We just had adventures, you know, we went traveling and things like that. Yeah, I lived in the coffin factory. So that was at the corner of Tecumseh and Niagara Street, just by Bathurst. And it's still there, and it's now $1 million condos. But at the time, my rent was $265 a month. And it was 1,100 square feet, and it looked out over Fort York and the waterfront. I could see down into the harbor, and we all had lots of room, and all of the other students were really interesting. So we had free, comfortable painting situation, and we had good critiques. So different people would come in. We always had really interesting guests, like Mike Snow would drop in, and various people, Nabi Kubota, all really interested, Av Isaacs, that people would come in because this was a very accessible, interesting place to be. My first art show was just when I was out of York, and it was at my local library, and so I was totally nervous, and but an enormous number of people came. And what was the most interesting thing for me was putting my work up on the wall in a space that wasn't mine. It was totally intimidating, and it wasn't until many years later that I kind of got way more relaxed. I remember when I was in the Toronto art scene, I used to get so nervous going to other people's art openings. It didn't have anything to do with me. I just realized, wow, it's a sea of these incredible people. It was nerve-wracking. I eventually got over that. Western had the most attractive program when I looked at all the programs, and I'd never been to London before, so why I was interested is I've always been interested in writing and reading, and I would find refuge in libraries, and I finally put two and two together and said, I like it here, you know. So when I came to London, and I was totally delighted. I came in a snowstorm, and the campus was deserted, and it looked like medieval castles. I just thought, what a dream. Big trees. I just came out of slushy Toronto, out of Kensington Market, and coming to London was a very nice experience. And when I started library school, I was astonished because people talked to each other in a different way than they did in art school, and I realized I was meeting an entirely different kind of people. London Public Library. So I was hired to cover a 4-month contract, and it was the home library service for seniors, a lot of people that are shut in. And it was fascinating. And luckily, it just developed into a permanent job. And then I moved from library to library. And that was meeting all different communities. Oh, well, that was just an art show. Many people who work in the library are artists or musicians or writers. And so that was an art show of library staff, and my piece wouldn't fit in the gallery space there, and Spencer Gallery. So I asked if I could just bang a few holes on the wall by what is now the teaching center and hang it up. And when I hung it up, they said, "We don't want you to ever take it down. Just leave it there." So that was lovely. I became very interested in the architecture of different phases of London's history and the stories that each house tells. And so the heritage, the Architectural Conservancy end of it, once I was living in different houses, that's when I became interested in restoration work. And so I did a little house on Rectory Street, and that just got me going. And then I did a little house on Miles Street, and that was pretty interesting. And then we came here, and this was an auto body shop. And when we repurposed this from an auto body shop to a studio, that's when I got my first award from the Architectural Conservancy, because that was repurposing industrial space. And then next, this was the last house in London where we are right now. And the next house up next to me here is a really beautiful brick cottage, 1876. And our neighbor who lived there his entire life finally passed away, and he was very, very old. And his daughter knew that I looked after her father, and then I said, well, I'd like to buy it and restore it. And she was very happy. So I worked on restoring that house it took 1.5 years to restore. It was an exquisite little house. And the Architectural Conservancy came and walked around and beamed. And so that got an award also. Good question. I think art is really about finding meaning, and it's the same with writing and with music. It's not necessarily in words. It could be in emotions. It could be in deep insight. So it's always evolving. It's a live thing. I think when I was young and afraid about being an artist. How was I going to make a living? I think I learned that question from my mother's fear about that. And I think perhaps it wasn't something, a message that anyone else conveyed to me. It was a message that I carried myself, a preconception that, well, I was just a girl, so I wasn't really sure that I could be an artist. You know, I didn't have a lot of conviction until I was more mature. And I think I might have, and I don't know if I were a male, if that would have been different. That's a really good question, and everybody is at a different place of what it is that worries them or challenges them or what their ambition is. So I wouldn't have a sweeping piece of advice for anyone except to feel deeply within yourself what it is that you want, and not be intimidated or think that you have to please someone else or meet someone else's standards. You're good enough. I think I'm very lucky because being able to paint all the time is a dream for a lot of people. And I've been able to increase the amount of time that I can spend in the studio gradually over years. And now I'm retired from working, so I absolutely can paint and do whatever I want all the time. And I think that's an enormous privilege. It didn't just happen. It wasn't a given. I think it's much bigger now. I think there are a lot of people involved. It's more spread out. When I came to London already, it was kind of the big heyday was already over. A lot of people, and that was in the mid-'80s. So a lot of really prominent people had already left and gone on to careers, big international careers. I feel a lot of vitality now. I think there are a lot of many different groups of people that are involved in art independently of each other, and it actually feels like Toronto felt when in the 60s. The size of the art community when I was growing up in Toronto, although it seems big now, it was really quite small then. There were very few galleries. So what I feel now in London is that it's reaching that kind of critical point, and there are many, many artists. I mulled over that question because you did give me a hint that you were going to ask me that question. And I would say what I'd like to hint at in my paintings is how lovely this place is, and that my legacy would just be leaving that feeling and that awareness for people in the paintings. I think that we live in an extraordinary place. We're very, very lucky, and it took going away and coming back for me to become aware of that. So what I'm doing in my paintings is just celebrating that feeling of where we live and our community. Okay, I'll tell you the story of the rocking chair. Okay, the rocking chair is this little chair here. And when this building was for sale, it was for sale as an auto body shop. And it was for sale for too much money. And I would come every Sunday and see if it was still for sale. And it still was. And one day it was February, and I went to the Goodwill that's at the top of the hill. And there was a chair, a little rocking chair that one. And it was $2.99. And I sat in it. It was pretty comfortable, and it wasn't very heavy. So I bought it, and I carried it on my head. I carried it down the hill because I was on my Sunday walk, and it was snowy. And I sat down on the bike path and in the snow, and I rocked in the chair, and I looked at the back of this building. And it was so peaceful, and I could just hear the geese, the Canada geese, honking, and they were landing. They winter out here, out the back, and the wind in the trees, and it was so lovely. And I just picked up the rocking chair, and I walked home, which was Mile Street. It's quite far, and I went into the front door, and I said, "Okay, I'm buying it," because my husband didn't want to buy this place, and we promptly bought it. So the rocking chair has pride of place in the studio. I will use watercolors, ink on paper. I do like that. I don't like the feel of acrylic for some reason, and I just adore oil paint. It's very lush and fluid, and it's smooth. And one of the great things about oil paint is you can leave it in the studio in the winter, and it's fine. It doesn't freeze. But if you leave watercolors in the studio when it's unheated, they're goners. So. Oh, I'll just tell you a little thing about the art exchange. Al Stewart and Karen Stewart, that was their original gallery, and Alan did the framing and hanging, the art shows, and Karen ran a drapery business and custom drapery. And every once in a while, an interior decorator who would be coming to pick up the custom draperies would come in, and Alan had always found a painting that matched the fabric perfectly. And quite often the decorator would say, "Well, I'll take that too on spec," and that worked astonishingly well. I thought, wow, they've got a magic combination here in this business. So I thought it was really interesting because part of me didn't want to have anything to do with decorating and art being seen as decoration. And another part of me was going, yeah, wow, sold another one.